Hey, everybody. Welcome to How to Survive Survival. I am super excited that you are here and you're joining me and my guest, a friend of mine, Martin Lockett, who we're going to have our conversation in just a minute. But I'm just so grateful for your time and that you are here to learn and to be inspired and encouraged by Martin's story. Martin is a friend of mine. We've known each other for a couple of years. I've interviewed him on multiple occasions. He's one of my survivor spotlights. If you've read How to Survive Survival in the book, I just find him, um, it feels cliche to say inspirational, but he's overcome so much. And I keep thinking about several things that we talked about. During this conversation between the two of us that you're going to hear in just a minute. But the main takeaways that I think you are going to come away with after you listen to this episode is that his famous line, I've quoted Martin so many times around this, is that things don't have to always have a reason for happening, right? But that doesn't mean we can't derive purpose from them. And Martin spent 17 and a half years in prison for charges of involuntary manslaughter because he drove drunk on New Year's Eve when he was just in his very early 20s. He spent the rest of his 20s and all of his 30s in prison. And he made a vow to his two victims who died as a result of that decision that he made to drive drunk that night, to pay respect and to pay it forward and to dedicate his life to helping people and supporting people who struggled with substance abuse, alcohol disorder, and so he is here to share with us not only just his story, but how he has connected with his purpose and how that has enabled him to survive survival. So without further ado, I welcome Martin to the conversation. Hi, I'm Jessica Buchanan, and this is How to Survive Survival. This podcast is about what comes after the crisis, after the moment that changes everything, after you've done what you had to do just to get through. Each week, I sit down with people who faced hardship and made a deliberate choice about what to do with it. People who've turned pain into purpose, who found a way to make meaningful contribution because of what they survived, not in spite of it. Because survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of who you become next. Welcome to the show. Martin, it is so good to have you here. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to be here. Looking forward to it.
So, why don't you give us a little bit, just a little bit of backstory for our listeners to get a context of what it was that you initially survived, and then we'll move into the conversation around how you survive survival. But I'll just hand it over to you if you could just tell us a little bit.
Sure. So I was a severe alcoholic throughout my adolescent years, and I very much normalized drinking and driving as a result of this. And so on a very tragic day, New Year's Eve of 2003, after drinking all day and partying all night, at 1:03 a.m. in Northeast Portland, where I lived, I sped through a red light and crashed into a car, tragically killing two people instantly, severely injuring a third person who ultimately survived. And I was processed on 2 counts of manslaughter in the first degree and assault in the second degree, as well as 3 DUI related misdemeanors. And just for added context, in the state of Oregon, those are considered violent person-to-person crimes, and so they have mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines attached to those particular charges. So I knew that as I was in the back of this police car and I'm being hauled downtown to be processed, I knew that my 24-year-old life was over. Right, as a young, I would not see freedom as a young person anymore. I knew that, and then I'm also trying to process the fact that I am now responsible for killing two innocent people. And then there's a third man who was fighting for his life. So I don't know his fate at that point. Thank God he survived. But so yeah, to say I had to wrap my head around a lot that fateful day is a gross understatement. Everything would turn about 3 or 4 days later, and I don't know if you want me to get into this now, the really pivotal moment in my
Yeah,
life that set me
let's
on
do
this
it.
course. I remember I was in my cell, just again trying to process everything that had happened. It is 3 or 4 days, so I'm clearly sober now, and reckoning with what I had done. And someone had slid the Oregonian newspaper underneath my door, and it's our statewide newspaper in Oregon. They slid it underneath my door, and initially I was confused because I didn't ask anybody to see a paper or anything like that. But I figured there must be something important in there that somebody wants me to read. So I pick up this paper and I start to flip through the pages, and I see my mugshot squarely on the front page of one of the
Mm,
sections. And so I began to read this article, and with each paragraph that I read that morning, for the first time in several days now, my faceless victims became people.
mm,
And these people had a pretty remarkable story. And what I read about was that they were in long-term recovery from addiction. One had 16 years, the other had 17 years clean, respectively.
yeah.
And they had literally devoted their lives to help people get clean and sober. I remember it talked about them. They would watch women's children so that ladies could attend AA and NA meetings. They were very much involved with Volunteers of America and their recovery
Mm,
efforts. They were associated with Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I mean, they really lived it, right? They
yeah.
lived this life of recovery and
Yeah.
activism and advocacy. And in fact, perhaps the biggest irony of what happened this night was that they were en route, returning home from a clean and sober New Year's Eve party at the
Mm,
convention center when they were struck and killed by a drunk driver. And I remember the columnist had used a term I had never heard before. He called it a palpable irony that these people who had, you know, devoted their lives to help people get clean and sober would have theirs cut short by a drunk driver, someone they would
mm,
have done anything to help.
right.
And then he concluded the article with the seminal phrase that would, you know, lay the foundation to what I would go on to do with the rest of my life, including
Yeah.
today. And he said, perhaps the person they will have ended up helping the most is the man who's charged with killing them. And it was such a profound, heavy, resonant statement. I didn't quite know what to make of it at the time and how it was going to apply to my life. I was just looking at the fact I'm going to go to prison for a really long time, and I
Yeah.
don't know what this means.
Yeah.
But it was also a phrase that I could not ignore, right?
Yes.
And so I remember I kind of just got back to my spiritual roots. We were raised in the church, and I had clearly
Mm,
gotten away from that. So in desperate moments, what we do,
yeah.
we turn to God, our higher power,
Yep.
but I really needed, clarity and revelation into what this heavy statement was supposed to mean for my life. And so
Mm,
I prayed about it. I meditated on it for months. It didn't come right away, kind of like I thought it would in some vivid dream or just some supernatural sign that would say here's what the phrase
yeah.
means, Martin. It didn't
Yeah.
come that way. Rather, it came in the firm conviction one day that the only way this tragedy will not be in vain is if I carry on these people's legacies and do everything I can to help folks who are struggling with mental health challenges, substance abuse, and things like that. So again, I had no way of knowing how that would tangibly manifest, but I knew that I was committed in that moment to the cause, and so that's kind of what led me here to doing the work that I'm doing today.
Oh, I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard this story. I mean, you and I have been friends for a long time, and we're actually working together on your next memoir. And so I'm familiar with the details of your story, and I still I'm like head to toe chills. It's just, yeah, I mean, palpable irony, right? And I wonder, I mean, I'm sure you've thought about this from every angle. I wonder if you could go and talk to these people whose lives were lost that night, what they would say, because look at the profound impact that they've had on your life and then the ripple effect that has continue to go and impact so many other people through the work that you do, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, I know that you've had interactions, I guess, with family members. And so do you feel like you've gotten some sort of reaction, or like what has the reaction been?
Yeah, so when you were just, talking about this, the idea of me, having an opportunity to talk to those that I had taken from this world and what they would say, and I kind of have, I guess, somewhat of a glimpse into what that conversation would be.
Yeah.
Because I have heard from two of the daughters, one from each of the victims who passed away that night. And the first time I had heard from one of them was when I was still incarcerated. So this is at the outset of the pandemic. So we're talking March of 2020. The world shuts down.
Mhm.
And I get this letter from this woman. I obviously don't know her name. At that point, I was on pen pal website, so I would get letters from people all over the world.
Mhm.
And so I just thought it was another pen pal, but I recognized the last name, right? I'll obviously never forget that. And so when I read this last name on the outside of this envelope, my heart is in my stomach because I have no idea what this letter is
Yeah. Oh, I
going to
imagine.
say, right?
Yeah.
I open up this letter and it's just a short yellow notepad of paper, three, simple paragraphs. And she starts off by saying, "Hi, my name is such and such. My mother was such and such." And then she immediately goes into expressing concern for all of us who were incarcerated during that time. She said it must be a very, very difficult time for all of you. I can't imagine what it must feel like. The world is shut down. She said, "Let me know if there's anything I can do for you, if I can send you money or toilet paper or food or like anything to basically make my life better." Right? She never went into expressing, how difficult it had been for her and her family over the last 16 years at this point, or just anger toward me, nothing like that, right? Literally only concern for my welfare, which just floored me, right? I
Yeah.
had no idea that I was going to receive those words. And so I sat with that letter for 2 or 3 days, making sure that I conjured the proper response, right? And it was critically important for me at that point just to let her know everything that I had done over the last 16 years to honor what I said I was going to do. And I know we'll get into that. But it was really important that
Yeah.
that she knew I wasn't just saying when I made that vow to her and her family members and the cameras and the judge and the courtroom, that I wasn't just saying what would sound good, right? To
Right.
folks paying attention to the
Yeah.
to the story. That I wasn't just saying what would be, appeasing to her or her family or the judge, right? None of that mattered. It was critically important that she knew that this was in me, that this was going to be the rest of my life. This would be my devotion, and this is how I was going to honor as best I could her mother's legacy. And so I wrote her that, and she writes me back, and she says, "Martin, thank you from the bottom of my heart. You have followed through with what you said you were going to do, and I'm going to share this with my family the next time I see them." She said, "This is probably the best possible outcome that we could have hoped for coming out of this tragedy." And so
Yeah.
she again thanked me for that. We exchanged a few letters. I haven't heard from her since that time. I may never hear from her again, but again,
Right.
I feel like that was divine, right?
Yes.
That exchange
Yes.
was a divine orchestration. And so I've been out now 4.5 years,
Okay.
and my Instagram account, as you know, I when I go out and I speak at high schools and places, conferences, whatnot, I try to get pictures and videos to show that work, right? That
Right. Absolutely.
this is my platform. And so about 3 or 4 months ago, I get a DM, and it's a woman that I don't know. But again, it's another very familiar last name, right? Of
Mhm.
the one, actually the driver who passed away. And she says, "Hi, Martin. I'm the youngest daughter of, so and so." And she said, "I just really appreciate seeing your work and you speaking out about drinking and driving." She said, "My mother was an incredible woman." And she said, "I would love to talk to you about her someday if you're open to that." Right. And and she thanked me for, again, doing the work. And it was just a short little message, and I wrote her back after I collected myself. I was in tears, of course, and
Of course, yeah.
processing that. And then I wrote her back and I thanked her profusely. And I said, by reading the newspaper article that morning, I could clearly see your mother was just, a giant in the recovery field. And I have no doubt that, many people have been deeply touched by the ways that she helped them. And I said, I'd love to hear more about her. I'm in Portland every month because she still lives in Portland. This woman does. I said, I'd love to have coffee, lunch, whatever, and talk about your mom. And she wrote me back and she said, I'm not quite ready for that
Yeah,
yet, but I'll keep your number. And when I'm ready, if I'm ready, then I'll definitely reach out. That was several months ago. Haven't heard from her again. Again, totally respect her time and
absolutely.
space and just the courage, like thanked her profusely for the courage it took to reach out to me and to express these things. Even all these years later, that couldn't have been easy.
No.
And so yeah, so I've had those two exchanges, just having the validation, I would say, from those family members, for the work that I've done. To again, as best I can, honor the lives of their loved ones means everything to me.
Does that feel like forgiveness?
It does. And, I'll say that, a year after the crash happened, at the sentencing, people they're able to get victim impact statements.
Right.
And there were actually three daughters there, not these daughters, but three other daughters there, of the victims who expressed, explicit forgiveness for me, which just blew me away. Like a year removed from the crash, first time they had seen me, and they expressed forgiveness and compassion. And one of them said, if this was, because initially we were going to do an open sentencing hearing where I plead guilty, but I don't agree to a certain amount of time in prison. It's more a hearing of character witnesses and people who can
Okay.
attest to who I am and how I live my life. And then the judge would render their decision.
Yeah.
And one of the women, the daughters had gotten up there on a stand, and she said, if this was going to proceed as I ended up taking a plea bargain before we actually did the open sentencing, so there was no mystery as to how much time I was going to get. But she said, if this was going to be an open sentencing hearing, I was prepared to ask the judge for leniency for you because this is clearly not something that you intended to do. You stayed at the scene, you showed remorse, you took accountability, you admitted you were wrong, you shouldn't have been driving that night, all these factors.
Yeah.
And then just the fact that she had forgiven me and didn't harbor, bitterness and resentment, which she would have had every right to do,
Yeah.
understandably, but she didn't. And so I mean, that just, they were just so graceful and kind and beautiful. And that meant a great deal for me in that moment when I was feeling this immense shame for
Yeah.
what I had done and carrying the burden of this tragedy. And they helped to kind of lighten that in that moment.
Incredible. Let's talk about shame for a minute. Okay. Because I write a lot about shame and how to
Hmm.
survive survival. I know you're writing a lot about shame currently. And this is something that you talk about a lot. What what are the lasting impacts of not being able to free yourself from shame? How do you free yourself from shame? And then, and I realize I'm bombarding you with questions here, but how do you think that shame keeps people from being able to move out of survival and into the thriving space?
1000%. In a nutshell, shame is crippling. It is debilitating. It is an active force that is working against you from fulfilling your I would say God-given potential and your calling and your purpose and your mission in life. If we're not on guard, and I kind of differentiate between guilt and shame, right? A lot of
Yeah.
people use them interchangeably as though they are the same because they feel very similar, right? They're both, very, heavy feelings of regret and, of self-condemnation. but they're different. They're different. And I would, characterize guilt as our friend. I would say guilt is your conscience telling you that what you did you're not proud of. It harmed people. We don't want to do that again, and so it enables us to course correct,
Yeah.
right, and to change our behavior so we don't repeat that because we don't like that
Yes.
feeling. That's a
Yes.
good thing. If we didn't have any feelings of guilt, we would just run amok and do everything, harming
Right.
people,
We'd be
hurting people.
psychopaths. Yeah.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
So guilt we want to embrace. The thing is, Jess, when that guilt festers, right,
Mhm.
and you really ruminate on that, right,
Mm.
and that blame is
Mhm.
turned inwardly, especially, then that can quickly morph into shame. And
Yeah.
shame is more of this. There's no behavioral correction mechanism associated with shame, right? It is just this overarching dark cloud that follows you wherever you go. It is telling you that you are not worthy of forgiveness, that you don't deserve forgiveness, that you're not, deserving of love, of compassion, of understanding. All these things that we, I think, inherently as human beings deserve, right? Because none of us are perfect.
Mhm.
And so when you are kind of stuck in that, it really zaps your energy and prevents you from using that energy to really step into your purpose, right?
Mhm.
How you are to process whatever it is that if it was trauma, if it was a personal situation that you
Mhm.
created, a mistake, whatever the case.
Yeah.
It prevents you from being able to properly process that, right? And the way that it's meant to be processed. And I feel like, frankly, we go through things for a greater reason, right? A greater
Yes.
purpose. And we are
Yeah.
used to help ourselves and help
Mhm.
humanity and all of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But if you're stuck and mired in shame and the heaviness of that, the grip of that, it will certainly prevent you from being able to rechannel that energy into things that are more aligned with your ultimate purpose in life. And so that's how I encourage people to be on guard and allow guilt to do its job, right? Feel what you need to
Mm.
feel, allow it to serve its purpose. Once you have course corrected and you are no longer doing that behavior and you're looking to make amends, however that looks for you, allow that to be enough, right? But I
Yeah.
can't tell you you've done enough. You should forgive yourself. You can't tell them. The
Mhm.
family can't tell them. That's something they have to decide, or they have to reach that place for themselves, right? They have to get
Mhm.
there and they have to be able to look in the mirror and say, what I am doing is enough. And it took me 3 or 4 years, in all honesty,
Did it?
to get to that place, right? I mean, I talk about this in the book, or, when the book comes out, folks will read about it, but every December was
Mhm.
torment, right? I mean, I
Mhm.
would absolutely torment myself over what had happened because this happened December 31st. So the whole month of December, I would force myself to relive every detail of that fateful day. And it would just feel horrible. I wasn't, doing my daily activities, wasn't exercising, wasn't eating properly, wasn't sleeping properly. And during that 31-day period, I was not, moving toward the cause, moving toward the
Right.
purpose, moving toward the mission, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
when I realized I was actually dishonoring my victims by only committing to the cause for 11 months out of the year and not 12 months, then I said, I can't, I'm not going to live, under the bondage of shame anymore because it's
Yes.
not helping me, it's not helping my victims, it's not helping the cause, it's defeating like all of that, right?
Right.
And so, I just allowed myself to forgive myself, gave myself
Mhm.
permission, if you will, to say that what I am doing is enough. And
Yeah.
everybody has to get there, on their own terms and in their own time. But you need to get there.
Yeah. I often think about attaching to purpose. And, I think a lot of people maybe don't agree with this method or practice or thought process, I guess, because perhaps it seems almost like that you're detaching or you're not like fully processing or dealing with your emotions or your healing or however you want to say it. with some sort of project or purpose, the mission, whatever, however you want to describe it. But for me, and I wonder how this how this lands with you, for me, attaching to purpose, that looks like having these conversations about trauma and helping people and giving them a platform and an ability to share their stories and what they've been through, that has made my pain, particularly from the trauma of my kidnapping experience, bearable.
Hmm.
It makes it so that I can walk around this world and carry that more easily or
Hmm.
more effectively, if you will, because it'll never go away,
Right.
right? It is what it is. And there's
Hmm.
just that's full stop. I have found for me how to survive survival. The key for me has been to figure out how to connect with my purpose so that that pain would be more bearable, so I could continue to live a life worthy of all of the SEALs that risked their lives and their families and all the millions of dollars that were spent to bring me home. I mean, in my own way, I understand shame from a different perspective. But man, walking around with the knowledge that so many people sacrificed so much so that I could live, that was a heavy thing for me to carry. And so it got easier when I was able to identify a way in which I could give back. And perhaps if we were talking to a psychologist right now, they would say that that's not a healthy coping mechanism. But in my opinion, it's healthier than, becoming an alcoholic or a drug
Hmm.
addict or a shopaholic or all the other mechanisms that we as human beings use to relieve our pain. What do you think about that?
Right. Great point. And I would think that if they are a psychologist who is up on modern literature and findings, they would support this idea. So another chapter in the book that I've written about is about post-traumatic growth strategies, right? And
Yeah.
they have done numerous studies from folks who have endured oppression and intense racism to folks who have gone through natural disasters, just a large swath of folks who have experienced different types of trauma, and they have found that something is this highly correlated with being able to overcome symptoms of PTSD is engaging in post-traumatic growth strategies. And one
Okay.
of those post-traumatic growth strategies is intense rumination on how you can derive some sort of purpose from what happened, right? How you can focus on bringing some meaning to what happened in a purposeful way. And by and large, that always invariably includes helping other people,
Yes.
right? Because at that point, what you have gone through something. It's like if a family is walking through the woods, right, and say the mother or father, goes ahead of the kids and they slip and fall in some ditch because it was covered up by brush, right? The reasonable response is they're not going to just get up and continue on and just hope that their family coming behind them doesn't fall into the ditch. They're going to go back and warn their family about the ditch that lies ahead, right?
Yeah. Right.
So inherently, we are driven to use our experiences, no matter how difficult, they may be, but to use those experiences and what we've learned from those experiences to then help those who are coming behind us, if you will, or those
I
who
love
have
that.
gone through it or gone through something similar or trying to find their way out of it. And
Yeah.
so we're just inherently driven that way. And it's usually, if we're just kind of going throughout life and everything falls into place and there's no real struggles, we're not really going to have opportunities to be able to, impact people in that way. Not to say we don't
Yeah.
have anything to offer humanity,
Sure.
but in a way that you have, survived survival and many others, we have just invaluable, unique life experiences that can be used to help folks who are going through similar struggles. And so again, ruminating on the meaning that one can bring from what they've gone through is um, significantly correlated with overcoming trauma and certainly signs of PTSD.
Absolutely. I mean, not only does it continue to build our resilience, right, which we're going to need because it's tough out there,
Hmm.
but also it gives us a reason to get up out of bed in the morning, And so,
Right.
like, how I'm sure you witnessed so many people who didn't choose to do this, or perhaps were not able to do this in prison. Like, within the confines of your prison cell, how were you able to access this? Was it just this drive and this need to make amends and to carry out your promise and make good on your word, or what was it that enabled you to do something so purposeful and so meaningful, and to cultivate such amazing strategies within a really unlikely place?
Yeah. Um, so, you know, going to prison, obviously, everything changes. And, you know, I felt that because up to that point, everything that Martin had relied on to get through life clearly hadn't worked. It was an
Yeah.
utter fail, right? The things that I valued, like superficial materialistic things, like, money and cars and clothes and pretty women and all these things that society told me I needed to feel important and to
Yeah.
feel, successful or whatever the case. It got me into prison for 17 and a half years. And
Mm,
not just me into prison for 17 and a half years, but it also took the lives of two beautiful, innocent people. So
yeah.
I remember when I got to prison, it was January 25th, 2005. It was bitterly cold. I had just gone through the processing phase. So I remember I took out my big jean jacket they had just issued me and my state issued beanie and my jeans, and I go outside and I just want to breathe fresh air. But I really wanted to, and I did spend the next hour, 2 hours as I was walking around that track on that prison yard, really assessing my life and how I had ended up in prison for nearly 20 years. And I was like, and by the end of that hour two long walk, I had come to the conclusion that if I was going to leave prison a different person, then something from within had to change. And
Wow.
then and then about a minute later, I came to a pretty different conclusion. And I realized that changing something was not going to be good enough. I knew that everything had to change because it wasn't just that bad decision to drink and drive that particular night. I mean, there was a series
Yes.
of poor decisions that
Yeah.
led up to that point,
Yeah.
right? And that series of poor decisions was really based on my belief system, my value system, just the entire way that I lived my life.
Yeah.
And it was self-destructive.
Yes.
And so, in that really pivotal moment, I realized I have a lot of work to do, and I'm going to need all 17 and a half years to do it, right? Because there are there are
Wow.
there are character things that I need to work on. There are, this whole worldview that needs to shift. That didn't happen overnight, right? I didn't get there
No.
overnight, so it's not gonna
Yeah.
change overnight. And so and so when I embraced, and that's the first thing we have to do, I think, when we go through really like we have to accept that this is happening, right? Because if I'm continuing to fight it and I blame the system for getting this much time, and well, how come these people, this person
Yeah.
did this same crime and they got much less? If I'm
Mhm.
angry and like, that's going to keep me stagnant. It's
Yeah.
going to keep me stuck. I am not going to be able to embrace the opportunities for learning and for growing and evolving and shifting my world. Like, none of that's going to happen. So I first have to accept, right? I mean, it's, you go through 12 steps, right? The first
Right.
step is accepting that you're powerless over addiction, right? It all
Yeah.
starts with that radical acceptance, and then the work can begin. And
Okay.
so that's how I was able to then kind of really throw myself into my education and mentorship, and helping guys get their GEDs, and really really step into this purpose. But it started with that acceptance and knowing that I had a lot of work to do internally if I was ever going to come close to fulfilling this mission.
I mean, it just blows my mind. It's just so, I mean, it takes a lot of courage. and a lot of strength to accept the things that you're in a space, a reality that boy, you really don't want to be in. Whether you've caused it or it's happened to you, like I think so many people are so afraid to accept that.
Hmm.
Confusing um confusing acceptance for like embracing it,
Right,
you
right.
know?
Well, I mean, you had also, I mean, obviously much different circumstance, but you were held in captivity, and
Mhm.
at a certain point, you adapted to your new environment,
Yeah.
right, as a
Yeah.
means to survive.
Yeah.
And I was also trying to not just survive my situation, obviously very different. I wasn't under immediate, threat and danger like you were every
Mhm.
single day. But I also had a choice as to how I was going to utilize that
Yes.
time
Yes.
mentally. I think just as human beings, Jess, we are very adaptable creatures.
Uh-huh.
Most people think, I'm sure you'd be the first one to say, there's no way I'd go to prison for 17 and a half years and be okay.
Uh-huh.
You could. You would, Jess. I assure you. It's just the way. I mean, you could drop
Yeah.
us off anywhere in the middle of a
Yeah.
jungle and on God's green earth, and I'm telling you, we will find a way to figure it out. We will
Yeah.
adapt, right? Some
Agreed.
of us, we may do it quicker than others and in different
Yes.
ways. Eventually, we will adapt. And so,
Yeah.
but I would say the quicker we're able to adapt and accept our plight, whatever it may be, then the quicker and closer we're able to get to being able to process that in a meaningful way, and then ultimately move into the survival portion of that, and carrying out our mission and our
Yeah.
cause.
So, okay, I have two last questions. I mean, I could sit here and talk to you all day, but you know, that's just you got important work to do. So, my first question is, what would you say to someone who has survived the trauma, they've survived the impact, and they're standing on top of the rubble of their life,
Hmm.
and they're thinking, okay, what next?
Yeah. So if you've come out of the fire, if you will, then I think you're in a solid position to then look to move toward bringing a greater purpose. And I get that doesn't, for some folks, that doesn't mean that they're going to be a public speaker, right? They have
Right.
no intention of bringing their message to the masses and things
Absolutely.
like that. It could be much more smaller in scope. It could be very intimate. It could be use, if you want to use what you've gone through to, volunteer with folks. If it's a small group, maybe you want to share your story. Some people, they will just come and show up to a speakers meeting, an AA speakers meeting, twice a year,
Mm.
to speak to folks after coming through, the throes of addiction and nearly losing their lives and things like that. And for them, that's their purpose, and they're good with that, right?
Yeah.
And so it could be as big as you want it to be. It can be as small as you want it to be. But let there be some meaning that can be shared, some purpose, some ways to help humanity. I think ultimately we're all driven toward that. And so, but it has to make sense for you, and it has to be, not, overwhelming for you, but it has to, be something that you naturally feel driven to do. But I would really encourage you to turn your attention, toward that, and then start to vigorously pursue that. And I know that could also, bring back a little bit of panic. Like, am I ready for this? Am I ready for this?
Mm.
And
Yeah, I say that all the
I,
time.
absolutely, and I would say that you are.
Mm.
It was not an easy thing for me to decide to be a public speaker when I was terribly shy growing up, which is why I leaned into alcohol and became an alcoholic. But I was also an introvert, right? So I'm an introvert, and I was terribly shy. So being a public speaker, let's just say, was not high on my list.
Right. I would never know that.
Right.
You're a tremendous speaker and a
Thank you.
wonderful communicator. I had no idea you were an introvert or that you were shy.
Absolutely. Both are very true. But once I committed myself to the mission, I knew that I had to overcome that that fear
Mm,
of public speaking. We know that public speaking is the number one phobia. Over 50%, I
mhm.
think it's about 51, 52% of people have a phobia, not just
Yeah.
some casual, but a phobia of public
Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah.
And so again, there's another chapter in the book where I talk about, intentionally, ruminating, almost becoming obsessed with with this goal, right? Is to
Yes.
become a public speaker. And I talk about how I was able to mold myself into a comfortable public speaker. But there was intention behind it. So I would say that you have to identify what you want to do, and then you have to be intentionally, almost laser focused, nearly obsessed with doing it, right? Because there's going to be so many other
Mm,
factors. Self-talk. A lot of it is negative self-talk that will try to prevent you from carrying forward with the mission.
right.
So you have to push through that by this intense focus and determination to push through, all of that rubbish and fulfill the mission.
Wow. Well, you are one determined individual. I can see that. So tell everybody what you're doing now and what your plans are for the future. And then I would just love for you to tell us how we can connect with you on maybe a more one-on-one basis.
Absolutely. So while I was in prison, I was able to I got my bachelor's in sociology, and I got my master's in psychology, and then I got state certified as a substance abuse counselor before I got out. So when I got out in 2021, I immediately went into I was a remote crisis line worker through the organization I currently work for, which is Lines for Lives, based out of Portland, Oregon. I did that for 2 years, and because they saw my work ethic, they felt my passion and the professionalism that I brought to the role. I got promoted to director of equity and cultural engagement, which means I get to travel to Portland every month for about a week and be in the community that I grew up in, the community where this whole tragedy happened. And I get to lead a small team into communities of color within that space to do trainings and workshops around mental health awareness and substance use prevention and suicide prevention. I was able to we were able to get a contract with the Department of Corrections last year for me to go in. I'll actually be at a prison that I served time in. I'll be there next week. I'll be training 14 adults in custody who are peer mentors. I'll be training them in the mental health first aid curriculum, which is an 8-hour curriculum on how to identify warning signs of mental health challenges, suicidal ideation. I've been into about 6 or 7 prisons over the last year to do this work, and constantly doing things in the community to spread awareness, especially in marginalized communities around mental health and substance abuse prevention. So I love my job. I love the flexibility I have. I get to make my own schedule, and do this incredible work. And then now, finally, I'll say I'm so proud of this program that we were able to create last year. We have created what I call the custody to counseling pipeline, and it was
Okay.
just implemented in December. Where, in the same way that I had an opportunity to get state certified as a substance abuse counselor in the state of Oregon, because it's not a sanctioned program, I just happened to kind of know the right people and get into the right space, and I was able to get it. And I had the financial means. But now we have created a pathway for folks who are in custody and eligible and motivated to get their state certification as counselors before they release from prison. And
That is
so,
incredible.
so excited about that. So excited about that opportunity. So that's my day job. And then privately, as you know, I travel the country. I do a lot of speaking
Mhm.
engagements. So I speak at about 10 to 12 DUI victim impact panels remotely every month. There's no way I could do that in person, but I do
Yeah.
those remotely from Seattle, Washington, all the way to here in Pennsylvania. And then I do about 4 or 5 law enforcement conferences a year that are around DUI
Yeah.
prevention, with drug recognition
Yep.
experts and things like that. I also speak at a couple traffic safety schools every year. I go into a lot of high schools before prom and graduation. They
Yeah.
have me speak to the juniors and seniors and tell my story. and then I also do alcohol highway safety classes that I speak at. And so um, life is busy, but
Yes.
life is good.
Yes.
And everywhere I go, I carry my victims with me. And
Mm,
again, I think that's the least that I can do. I'm
mhm.
still here; they are not. So the least that I can do is to keep their memories alive and hopefully prevent other folks from making the same catastrophic mistake and prevent other families from having to go through what I put those families through. And lastly, how folks can what I'm working on now is obviously the book
Mhm. Yep.
through Atlas Legacy Publishing, which is a subsidiary of Soul Speak Press.
Yep.
Super excited about that. It's been incredible working with you over the last couple months. And again, some of the things we talked about today will be in the book.
Yeah.
And I've already started working on some titles, and I'm going to get over to you to see what you think about
Can't wait to see him.
it. But so I'm really excited about that. Again, continuing to I'm looking to go to Chicago hopefully here in a few months. To I'll be speaking to about 500 college faculty. They want me to come and share my story as a keynote, and then do
Amazing.
a breakout session on mental health. Setting up things for the spring to go into different high
Mhm.
schools, new high schools as well. So that's always at the forefront,
Yep.
looking to get into more spaces,
Hmm.
in-person spaces, and then I'll be taking a couple trips. I'll be going to Guatemala in March to a Spanish-speaking school. You're there for a week. You hang out with the host family. So I definitely, it's not all work. I allowed myself to travel. I told myself before I got out of prison, I'm going to at least take 2 trips every year. So
Hmm.
far, I've done that. I've been to Africa. I've been to the Bahamas. I've been to Central America. I've been to, many states now. And so I just want to keep that going to have a good, proper work-life balance.
I love it. You have certainly turned life's hardest moments into meaningful contribution for the world, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you
so much
so
for having
much.
me.
Yes. Now, how can people connect with you?
Yes. Easiest way is if you're on Instagram, I'm at Martin L. Lockett. That's the only social media platform I have. I need to do better.
We
Um,
all do.
and then secondly, my website is martinlockett.com, where you can see, again, the different speeches that I offer and just the work that I've done. So those would be the easiest ways.
Well, I always credit you with this quote. And so I'm just going to leave it right here. Martin just floored me when, during a conversation we were having, he said, I'm talking to you like you're not here. You said to me, things don't have to always happen for a reason, but that doesn't mean we can't derive purpose from them. And if that doesn't just sum up what our work, both of us, what we're trying to achieve here, is all about, I thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story. I know it takes a lot of energy, and I'm just so grateful to know you.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me. This was an awesome, incredible conversation, and I hope that it helps some folks out there.
I know it will. Thank you for listening to How to Survive Survival. If you found something meaningful here, I'd ask for you to subscribe, share, or leave a 5-star review so these conversations can reach others who are walking their own road back. You can learn more about me and my work at www.jessbuchanan.com. And until next time, remember, what happened to you is only part of the story. What you choose to do with it is where your power lives.